Welcome to Mental Health Helps, where we heal, educate, listen, prevent, and support through conversations with experts, activists, and people's personal stories. Welcome to the Mental Health Helps podcast and video series. We are very excited today to be joined by Dr. Stevan Hobfoll. He's an expert in so many things that I'm going to let him kind of give us a brief introduction.
Well, I'm a psychologist. I was a professor at several universities over a 35, year period, and also worked clinically. And just as things evolved, you could say I'm so old. I was a psychologist before there was PTSD, which is true. It was before it was called PTSD. And I was one of the original researchers looking at, in fact, when I did my first projects on stress in the military and looking at soldiers' experience, the articles were rejected because they said, well, just ask them if it was stressful, because there's nothing inherently stressful about war or being a soldier.
Wow.
It's all a matter of individual perception. And I said, no, there's certain events that soldiers, and then we looked at firefighters, experience that are pretty uniformly highly stressful.
Right.
And so because it's true that a person's perception is critical, but if you have to wait for their perception, then you can't predict when stress is going to occur. You have to wait for how you would experience combat or being a firefighter or a police officer or, God forbid, the death of a child. But we actually knew very early that there are events. And what's I think also interesting is across the world, they're rank ordered pretty much the same across cultures as to what is most stressful, second most, third, fourth most stressful. Little slight variations by culture, but not much. Yeah, during the pandemic, the U.S., really world policy on the stress related to COVID was all related from my work.
Wow.
There's a whole other series of articles called The 5 Principles of Mass Casualty Intervention, and this is a mass casualty.
Yeah.
And our papers, it was actually, I was part of a commission. I was just the lead author.
This is good stuff.
So it's the world standard for dealing with disaster or mass casualty, school shootings, nuclear leaks, everything like that. And then now this new thing, the pandemic.
So you helped our country figure out how to deal with the stress from the pandemic.
The whole kit and caboodle was based on that paper, which I was the lead. We had 17 authors on it, but I organized it and wrote the paper.
Well, I want to say that you're very humble. He's board certified. You've been doing this a long time. You're a military veteran. And so he's got a little bit of experience when it comes to understanding these things, not just from a collegiate or, you actually have firsthand experience. And one of the things that we really want to address today is what you specialize in. What is your specialty training?
Well, my specialty is in extreme stress and trauma, but stress is a big field, and it just so happens my theory of stress is probably today the foremost theory of stress, which means I get invited to look at industrial and organizational stress, burnout, really across the spectrum, even though most of my work was at high intensity stressful experience as opposed to burnout, which is more like a slow bleed of stress.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your theory, the COR Theory.
Basically, the theory says, first and foremost, that humans are loss sensitive and gain insensitive. Meaning, let's take a simple example. You carry an insult with you for a lifetime. Your spouse tells you, oh, you look beautiful today, and tomorrow you want to hear again, do I look beautiful again today? There's almost no lasting of the positive. But if your spouse ever said, you look kind of fat in that dress, God forbid a guy should be so stupid
never
to say something like that, you would never, it's beyond forgiveness. You would say,
right.
Or Likewise, let's say with a child that a teacher says, you're very bright, you're talented, great. It has a nice effect, but not much of one. But if a child hears from a teacher that they're a dummy, or they carry that with them for years, if not a lifetime.
Yeah, you can do 99 things right, one thing wrong, and what do they focus on?
Well, our brains, and we and others have done neurological research, the brain barely recognizes gains. So we are loss sensitive, and it's loss of what? Loss of key resources. So our health, our self-esteem, even material things we own. These are all important resources, and we're loss sensitive. Secondly, the theory says that paradoxically gains increase in impact. In other words, the brain recognizes them, and emotionally we recognize them when we're in the midst of loss. And a nice example of this is if we were in if you're mentally healthy, and I were to tell you, Brandy, you're really doing great with your kids. You might feel that that's a nice thing. But if you were in therapy and we're feeling really terrible as a mom and a person and lacking esteem, and as a therapist, I said that it has much more power. And it's so in the midst of lots of loss of resources, then gain becomes important. A third principle of the theory, and we can kind of stop at this one, is that that loss spirals also have speed, in other words, momentum. So if you start losing resources, at first it has a slow speed, but then it gains both power and speed as the losses go on. And we get into these deep loss spirals in which we become overwhelmed or feel a panic attack or feel just that our life is, there is no possible light at the end of the tunnel, and it increases in rapidity as losses come. So that's the main parts of the theory. It's
very interesting, and you guys should Google it, COR, check that out, because I just find it so fascinating. And I know I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself and a lot of people when I say it's hard right now. The last couple of years have been, they've just felt so heavy for me, and I don't know if it's because of, teenagers and suicide and mental health and work stresses, but all of us are dealing with something. What are you seeing most of, I guess? And then the second thing is, I want to give people information that they can use. Like, how do you know? How can you recognize something, and what can we do?
Yeah. So it's been a highly stressful period for many, not for all. There have been a lot of losses. People have, perhaps first and foremost, lost their routine, which our routines are important for our lives. They give us sort of a rhythm of life. Many people lost their job or income or a substantial part of their income, lost their businesses.
Family members.
Death of family members. And then we have a whole political sense of losses going on, and I won't get into sides on this other than to say that both sides feel like we've gone to hell in a handbasket and all is lost. Even where both sides kind of saying that the democracy's over, which, is something that we all hold, most dear. So that's a huge loss, and that political background is important, because every time you turn on the news or look at CNN or look at Fox News, whatever you happen to listen to, you get hit in the face with it.
And we might think that it doesn't affect us, but deep down, it probably really does.
Yes, and some people are more politically in tune than others. Some people don't care. It's still part of the background that's influencing people, and I think most people care a lot about it.
So when we start feeling, I don't know, the sense of loss or depression or anxiety or whatever descriptive word we put there, one, how do we recognize that, and what are some things we can do?
Well, I think first of all, if stressful things are going on in your life, they're probably pretty obvious. Don't deny them, and get to work on them. You can, for example, psychologists or psychiatrists, social workers, counselors are seeing people online now, and since we're so good at being on the web and in front of a computer now, it's actually working out much better than I thought. So, certainly reaching out for help and not letting things just go is important. Most people who are facing a life crisis, whether it's the end of their marriage or, for example, a child threatening being suicidal, actually don't seek professional help. They think, well, we can handle this. We can do this internally. We're strong, and just doesn't work out that way.
So how do you encourage someone like that? If either you're that person or a loved one is going through that, what can we do to help? Well,
all you can do is encourage it. You can't, even surgery, you can't kidnap someone and anesthetize them and put them on the table. For psychological help, you can't even do anesthetize them. They have to come willingly and awake. And unfortunately, many people, their pride or fears are going to get in the way of getting help, and that's sad. I often hear people say, but we're just not comfortable with seeing a psychologist or a counselor, or my parents weren't when I was a kid because it wasn't the thing to do. It's really been the thing to do now for 50 years to see a psychologist or a counselor or a social worker. It's I think the same segments of the population that are too proud or too scared, or too belligerent or too angry. Mm-hmm. It's often the case also that people only come for mental health care when things have really, the bottom's really dropped out in their lives, and they've experienced a significant major loss. Men often don't come until their wives say, we're getting a divorce.
The ultimatum.
We're getting a divorce unless you get help.
Right.
And until that point, they don't come. Many people don't come for marital counseling until that point, until one of the two spouses says, "This is over unless we come." And then the other person has to want it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they say, "Okay, fine, bye."
How do you know if you're okay or if you're not? Because I had this conversation with my 15-year-old now. We were driving and she said, "I think you need counseling." I said, "For what?" She goes, "Well, you've dealt with a lot of trauma in your life, in the military and law enforcement and working as a reporter, and nobody dies alone. I've seen a lot of death and destruction." I said, "But I think I deal with it pretty well. Like, I'm not having issues." And she thought maybe I should. And so I've kind of been contemplating that, like, do I need to see someone? Because I feel like I've dealt with it okay. But as an expert, since I have you here, right, what would you say to that?
I think if you're not feeling often very anxious, uncomfortably anxious, if you're not feeling often depressed, or if you're not feeling flat, in other words, there's also many people experience, technical word is anhedonia, impossible word, but what it means is you don't feel down, like down here, but you never get up. And being with friends doesn't interest you so much. You still love golf or fly fishing or hunting doesn't interest you so much. Sex doesn't interest you very much. You're just kind of flat, and that's a sign of needing help as well, because we're supposed to. I mean, we can be down at times, but we're supposed to experience these ups, and to be mentally healthy, you should be at a kind of a positive above neutral, at least much of the time.
What is burnout?
Yeah. Before I get to that, let me just say the other indicators are unexplained health problems. If you keep having headaches and stomach aches, gastrointestinal problems, fatigue, and your physician tests you and finds nothing in blood work, it's probably something going on with stress. And there's a lot of people who have psychosomatic illnesses that don't go for help and end up going to all kinds of non-scientifically proven medical care and endlessly. Because if it works for you, that's fine. For some people, I think these things can work. But if you're 6 months, a year, 2 years into it, and you haven't gotten better, and blood tests don't come back showing a disorder in x-rays or imaging or whatever, then it's probably actually psychological.
So if you're noticing the things that you just mentioned, you're staying flat, you're not having the interest, you're having medical issues, then what would you recommend, like as a first, second, third step?
See a mental health professional. Okay. Certainly, if there are physical symptoms, seeing your family physician or your personal physician first would be a good first step. Unfortunately, a lot of times then that person is going to medicate you, and I'm not anti-medication for mental health problems, but it's usually not a good first step unless you have severe levels of disorder.
Okay. Now, let's say the person doesn't want to get help. They don't want to go see a mental health specialist. Is there things that you tell people, okay, if you're not going to come and see me, maybe try this at home, things that can help you cope through it or do it on your own?
Well, I think there are. It's important to eat right, bringing non-prescription drug use down to zero or near zero, bringing alcohol down to maybe one glass of wine or spirits a day, if you've been drinking, getting an exercise routine going, yoga. Very important to work on intimacy, work on your relationships, doing positive work on your relationships. Often, I think we're in a strange age because we know what being mentally healthy looks like because we have endless movies and TV shows doing it. And so I often say it's like learning to dance a tango. You're going to do it awkwardly, but put the steps in the floor and move in the steps of what a healthy person looks like. Often that works. Unfortunately, often the same person who is unwilling to go for help is unwilling to make those changes. We all like our lives to continue as they are. And so many people, I would say even that come for counseling, they come, take care, relieve my symptoms, but I'm not going to change anything important in my life. So don't play with my life. Well, that's not going to work because actually your life is what's influencing these things.
Yeah. And we all know that's the definition, right, of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So you're saying, okay, when somebody comes in for help, if you're struggling with this, are you giving them treatment that makes them, or not make, but as I was reading on your website, it says you're not just there for counseling, kind of, that you're there to make a change. You're there to help them. Yeah,
it's all about making changes in your life. And because most people need to make the changes pretty rapidly, I'm not into baby steps either. It's making major steps of change. And if you're not willing to do that, I'm probably not the right psychologist for you.
I think that's one of the frustrating things, or maybe I don't know if it's just me or others, but I find sometimes it's like, I've been in counseling for multiple years, but it doesn't ever seem, it seems like you just go talk to somebody. I'm like, if I want to just talk to somebody, you have friends. But if you want real help, then they need to go to an expert like you.
Well, the most effective form of treatment is in the family of treatments called cognitive behavioral therapy, which you work on the person's cognitions, you work on their behavior, and you work on their environment. So, for example, one of the things I didn't mention that we mention now is toxic people. Toxic people are going to kill you. And it might be a slow bleed, but they're going to kill you. And unfortunately, the toxic person might be a parent, but which obviously makes it harder to cut things off or limit them.
Right.
But toxic people are ruinous to our mental and physical health. Anger is the hardest thing for people to deal with. You can even, it's hard enough dealing with a person, a family member, a friend that's depressed, but anger is an ultimate toxin. And interestingly, it's also toxic to the self. People with anger disorders have early heart disease. If there's diabetes in their genetics, they're going to have early diabetes. They're going to die 10 to 15 years earlier.
Right. Well, Dr. Hobfoll, you are an expert in this. And speaking of anger, is there any tips or strategies to help somebody get rid of anger? Like if somebody's wronged you or if you're carrying around some anger, is there advice that you can give to the audience to help them maybe process it or find a way to let go of it?
If someone's done you that kind of harm, you usually do need therapy to set it down. And I don't want to speak in terms of forgiveness because there are many people that have wronged me that I've never forgiven, but I'm not going to continue being angry with them about it and tear apart my own life with it. But that doesn't mean that they're forgiven for wrongs that they've done. You also mentioned about burnout, and I did want to address that. Burnout is a slow bleed loss of resources that were often to do with work, but work can be, by the way, being a stay-at-home mom is a lot of work.
Right.
And I always say that if you're a stay-at-home mom, going to work is the low-stress alternative.
That's why I work.
Yeah. And without ample replenishment of resources. So if you're getting a lot of positive feedback for it and proper financial compensation and time to rest and relax, then you're not going to experience burnout. But if there's that bleed of resources, of your time, of your energy, of your self-esteem, without the replenishment of resources, financial, esteem-based resources, feeling like your work's really worthwhile, then burnout occurs. And also is related to anxiety and especially depression.
So people are finding burnout at home and at work, as you mentioned. So what can you do as an employee and an employer to spot it and help prevent it?
Well, actually, for employers, it's pretty easy. Give enriching work, give positive feedback to people, reward them properly for what they're doing, which you can do if the person's a senior executive or working at a fast food place. For the individual employee or worker, it can be much more difficult because they're often not in control of their world. And I think burnout is the main reason why we've had the Great Resignation, because people are unwilling to go back to jobs that were not replenishing them, not paying well, not taking care of them, not giving them proper benefits. Tough on employers. Obviously, it's a very involved, complicated economics to change this, but it's changing now.
I've read some articles that state that since the pandemic, people thought working at home was better, but then they realized that they need that social connection with people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's important, and it also depends on the individual. Some people are able to do that better than others. So, for example, if you have a very enriching home life with your partner or with friends, family, then working online is probably going to be easier. It's probably less creative, though, and I think that's where some of the big employers like Google want to get people back in their team interactions, because teams really need time, face-to-face, in-person time, to be doing major problem solving, and that's not going on as well online.
Right. What has been the best thing about your career?
Well, feeling that I can do work that's rewarding and that contributes to others' lives has been critical. I've been a scientist and researcher for decades, and in just my makeup, solving complex puzzles that matter has been incredibly enriching and important for me.
What are you most proud of, or what do you want to be recognized for?
I'm very proud of my former students and what they're doing with their careers. It gives a feeling of legacy, and my students are around the world, and I wake up. I always have emails when I wake up, because I have people that are former students and people that I've mentored in China and Australia and other time zones that they were working when I was sleeping. So in the morning I hear their exciting news or difficult news of what's going on, and that's terrific. I think most important has been doing work that the scientific community highly regards, because science matters. Science changes our lives, and very scary right now where science is being questioned, because science is everything. Every advance in medicine, in psychology, etc., has come from science, and textbooks are out of date in 10 years. So it's mainly stuff in the last 10 years, which means the important next things are going on now for the next 10 years. And
let's talk a little bit about suicide, along with mental health. Utah has one of the highest rates in the country. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the rate's high in Utah and has, I believe, increased during the pandemic. And I worry most about adolescents. First of all, adolescents need their peers. And so being cut off from your peers, or all you have is social media, which can be vicious.
It is vicious.
Can really amplify that negativity. I think one of and obviously a very sensitive topic, but for adolescents and the LDS Church, if those adolescents were, and I don't have statistics on this, but I have some experience through therapy and family members of therapy, where they were kids not on the straight and narrow, according to the church, in particular, were exploring homosexuality and being gay. And then they're locked at home with parents that are rejecting of that. Highly stressful. And I've had, luckily not in my practice, but in family members of those in my practice who have attempted or committed suicide during this time. And that's been a theme. It's obviously a very difficult issue. My neighborhood in Sandy, including LDS families, put up gay pride flags during every year now during Gay Pride Month, and then other anti-gay, I guess you'd call them, came with trucks to remove the flags. Well, the important thing for those families, including the LDS families, was to say, we love you, we accept you, and we're going to support you through what's obviously a very difficult path. And by the way, that's the Utah version. It's a very difficult path for fundamentalist Christians. It's a very difficult path for highly religious Jews. It's a very difficult path for fundamentalist Muslims. So it's not just a problem.
Any religion.
It cuts across religions.
Right. At the end of the day, all humans, we all long to belong. We want to feel like we belong to something, to someone. And when you're lacking that at home or in your community, it makes typically difficult situations even that much more difficult. With teenagers, what do you think about social media? Do you think kids should have access to social media, or do you feel like that's playing a part into their deteriorating mental health?
Well, it is playing a part in their deteriorating mental health. It's the cat's out of the bag. So, the cow's left the barn. There's no putting it back. I think to the extent that you can monitor it. So, for example, in preteens and early teens, where maybe you still have some control, you should exercise the control and monitor it. But it can be, devastating. I've always wondered how anyone survives middle school anyway, and then with social media, it just amplifies all that negative, tribal, very hateful behavior, which, by the way, is much worse among girls than boys.
Yeah.
They're coming into their early womanhood. The guys are oblivious for the most part and busy doing sports and things, so they're spared it, unless the girls actually create the cliquism for the boys.
Well, there was a case overseas where a 15 or 16-year-old girl posted on her Instagram, "Should I kill myself or not?" And 69% of her so-called friends voted yes, and she killed herself. And then, they're looking at trying them,
Right.
with some charges. And it's hard when your friends, we get into a mindset that these people online are somehow our friends.
Yeah. It's very powerful. We had I was living in Chicago before coming here, and there was actually a wealthy suburban neighborhood where in the middle school, through social media, the girls had become convinced that having oral sex wasn't sex and it was okay. And they were 12, 13, 14 years old. And they just convinced themselves through this social media context. In other areas, it's caused an explosion of heroin. And again, the social media saying it's okay, I've tried it, it's great, it's not so bad. And kids always have, the peer groups have been powerful and headed off in ways, in the Lord of the Flies personifies it in ways without adult supervision that are pretty terrible. But social media certainly amplifies it. I think all you can do as a parent is watch how your kid's doing. Watch their grades, watch their deportment, watch how they look, watch their activity, watch their eating habits.
Yeah. I just feel like for mental health, when they live in this sort of fantasy world of virtual friends versus reality, how can we bring them back to reality and help? And this isn't just for teenagers. I see adults like this too, where they would much rather just engage this virtual world than the people around them, their families, their coworkers.
Yeah. I think the biggest users of FaceTime are very angry 30 and 40-year-old men, politically angry, and really fomenting hate speech through social media. It can be monitored. Our laws regarding social media, and there are issues of privacy to address here, but for minors, privacy is in a sense less of an issue. And before one gets taken aback by that, we want to know what our kids are doing, and expect that while they're minors, we should know what they're doing, at least until they're near adulthood, 17, say. Mm-hmm. So it is possible. Facebook and other forms of social media have the ability to monitor negative text and to pick up on it. And they could, for example, set up a system where this at least red flag the individual, if not parents. And so, for example, what it would look like is you'd enter an agreement with your adolescent. You can be on social media, but just like in school, where I have to be able to get your grades,
right.
I have to get this report, which wouldn't give the content, but would pick up on negative wording, hate speech, attacks, verbal attacks. They're already doing it, monitoring our purchasing behavior,
right.
and opinions on everything. So everyone knows that you open up, Facebook or whatever, and you get ads that are geared towards you. You get political ads that are geared towards you. They're already monitoring. They're just monitoring for financial reasons rather than helping us with our kids.
Right. Do you feel like we have it harder as parents now? Because I kind of think like I was a pretty good kid, and I look at my kids, and while they're pretty good, I feel like it's really hard.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in the. I think each generation has its own, challenges. We barely had parental involvement. I was, a high school basketball and football player. I remember my dad, came, I think, to one game. Parents didn't come. Parents didn't take it. Literally, there was no parents on the, I played, youth sports. There were no parents on the sideline other than the coach. And occasionally a parent, this whole change to involve parenthood is really the first time in the world, other than in extreme environments like Eskimos and tribal places in Africa where you had to mind a kid or a saber or a tiger would eat them.
Extreme. So
it's only now that we're into this highly involved parenthood. Anorexia seems to be down. I mean, these things also come in epidemics. So about 25 years ago, there was just this. Actually, when you were how old are you
I'm
now?
44.
So when you actually exactly your teen years is just an epidemic of anorexia and bulimia. It's down now. It hasn't gone away, but it's.
What do you think is our teenagers' biggest issue? What do you think is the biggest issue facing our kids?
I think social media is huge influence on their lives. Because you got to remember, it's culture generationally is pretty old. But computers invading culture is very new, and we haven't adjusted to it. We haven't adjusted to it really well. Socially, we haven't done it by in law. So the laws are really a decade behind legislation regarding social media. I think figuring out what they want to be now is going to be a challenge for them that at least is very different. Also when you say our kids, I grew up in the inner city of Chicago. Life around me was horrific. And right now, for inner city kids, it's horrific. So, middle class kids, it's a whole different, thing that's going on. Certainly, the social isolation due to the pandemic, and kids, it's simple things. We talk about losses, missing your prom and homecoming dance, and all these marker events, not having a live graduation.
My daughter graduated class of 2020, and so everything shut down in March. She missed her senior prom, she missed her graduation, she missed all these things, and I didn't realize how much that would impact her.
Yeah.
But it's really she's been sad over it for almost 2 years.
Yeah. And
then my 15-year-old, I had to force her to come down last night and spend family time.
Yeah. Or you say come down. So one of the things that we really pushed was not having satellite rooms. So they shouldn't have a TV in their room. And you know, fortunately, this thing is social media that carries with you. But even that, you know, limiting time on that, because isolated as a satellite in your own room is not a good thing.
But what do you think as an expert in the field? Like, my daughter didn't want to spend time with us. I basically made her come down and hang out with us, and she was kind of upset about it, but I thought, you know what? I don't care if you're upset about it. You're going to come down and spend time with me whether you like it or not.
Right. Absolutely. And it has to be ritualized and routinized. Mm-hmm. So that, because, you know, it can't be a spur of the moment, let's do it now. And it's, having family dinners together and...
That's what we did. It's just hard to know because she's like, well, I've had a long day. I want to be alone. I'm like, I had a long day too.
Right. And you'll have time to be alone. We have this time together, and then you're going to have time to be alone because we love you.
So as parents, it's okay to force our kids to do things sometimes they don't want to do for their own good.
Yes, absolutely. And you can also have a jar, and you can say, every time you say, I'm being a bad mom, I'll put $1 in the jar, and you can use it for therapy or buying yourself, you know, a car or whatever when we're done. But...
You know, I heard about this. Tell me what you think also quickly, if I can, as an expert. So one of my friends, when her son turned 21, she gave him $2,100 for not doing drugs, not using alcohol, and not using tobacco. So she said, if you don't try any of these things, when you turn 21, I'm going to have this for you. And I thought that was really a bargain as a parent. If you can get your kid to 21 and just have to pay the... So I offered that to my daughter. I feel pretty good about it, but I also wonder, am I buying my child, and is it a good bargain?
It's a great bargain, and you are buying your child, and that's an okay thing.
Well, you know, I lost my best friend to drugs, and she started when we were teenagers. And I remember she was like vibrant and smart and fun, and then she tried drugs, and then she tried it again, and now she's lost three or four kids, and she doesn't know who she is. And I said, that was my best friend. Yeah. All because she tried it one time. Yeah.
Well, obviously there's more to the story than that, but once people start using drugs, it's a third person in the room that you have to deal with. I won't treat people with drug and alcohol addictions because I don't have the resources to be checking them, and they have, because you know you have to do weekly tests for sobriety. You can't just believe them, and usually need more resources than right now. I was part of a hospital and chair a department at a hospital, and so I still wasn't my choice to work with that, but we could work with that within that context because you had the medical support and support of a team working with them, and the backup of hospitalization available.
Right. Well, do you think it's for parents? Is it good to have these open conversations and set goals and things like that to try to keep them? Because, we see the commercials that say, hey, if you talk to your kids about alcohol and sex and drugs and your expectation, they're going to think about it.
Right. Yeah, and know your expectations. And there's a whole program that you'll see in some high schools, in smart high schools and college campuses, where they'll say, the vast majority of girls do not have premarital sex in high school, and they don't know that themselves because they might have 3 girlfriends that are, and sex is a choice, a mature choice that should be part of a deeply loving relationship and safe for when you're older. And hearing that from a parent, and hearing the norms, hearing that the kids that go on to do well in their professions do not abuse drugs and alcohol, or 85% of them do not abuse drugs and alcohol while in college. And so getting those norms, because you can start believing that,
think a lot of parents are afraid to have the conversations. How should they start it?
Well, I think just having them, you just have to
force it.
Yeah, you have to start it. And there's so many websites that can help you with this. There are, self-help books that just guide you through. The adults are in therapy. I have adults in therapy with me where I don't meet with the adolescents, but they have adolescents who have social anxiety, and I've turned them on to games that they can buy, and they play at the family dinner table. And now all the family loves playing these games that, what do you do in this situation? Kind of the card comes up, and then everyone in the family gets a turn saying what one should do, and then you hear from your kids about what they think, and then the card has answers and resources, brief answers and then resources. You want to go further. So
I like that. What about when it's just too hard and you feel like you're failing and you just want to give up? Like in parenting and business and whatever it is you're doing?
You need to be in therapy.
Dang it. Okay, what if it's a fleeting thought that just comes here and there?
You need to be in therapy. Everyone has... depends how you define fleeting. If it's occasional but overwhelming, your predominant thought is not like that, that's one thing. But if it's fleeting and you're worried about it, then you should talk to someone.
I think it's just hard sometimes when you're parenting and you just feel like, I've done everything I know how to do. Like, you almost just kind of want to give up on it, but you can't. Where's the magic pill?
Just like horseback riding. Gotta keep at it.
Just keep on keeping on. All right. I'm trying.
Yeah.
I am trying. It's just hard. And I know I'm not alone because everybody keeps messaging me.
Right. Well, and doing stuff together, because, talk about having your daughter come down, which is great, by the way, and family dinners are without cell phones are really important. But then also having adventures together, whether it's skiing or hiking or family vacations, all those things are...
We're trying that. We're trying it all. What are some things that we can do to ground ourselves or to center us?
Well, we mentioned these things of working on your relationships, working on positive relationships, being supportive of those we love, and not constantly in conflict with them, or hardly ever in conflict with them, which doesn't mean you can't discuss problems, but they shouldn't... they should be worked out and worked through. We talked about taking care of your own mental health, eating, keeping any drug or alcohol use down to a minimum, if at all. Minimum can be okay. It's where it becomes more than the minimum that people are surprised that more than 2 glasses of wine a day for a male qualifies as a substance use disorder. When you start getting into 4 a day or 5, and there's only 5 beers. Well, a beer is equivalent to 1 shot of spirits, whiskey or gin, or 1 glass of wine. So if you're doing a 6-pack every night, you're an alcoholic. So, monitoring this and taking positive charge of our lives. We talked about exercise, things like yoga or meditation.
How would you propose talking to somebody who you think is struggling, whether it be a family member or a friend?
Well, I think talking to them and being open about it and not being scared of... We'll often hear, for example, on suicide, where people say, I suspected it, but I was scared I would cause it if I, and you're not going to cause suicide by bringing it up, and then getting the person help, and if necessary, if it's a family member, and you think they're suicidal, you call the police, and the police will come and do a wellness check, and if necessary, bring them to the emergency room. And a psychiatrist or psychologist on call, social worker, will do a mental health check and, if necessary, hospitalize the individual. And most of these hospitalizations are only 2 to 3 days, if not less. Often there's no need for hospitalization if the person's willing to hook up with treatment. But if you suspect someone's at the cliff, you don't say, "Hey, you're at the edge of the cliff. It looks like you're going to jump." Let's not talk about that, because if they're already by the edge of the cliff, jumping's a likely alternative.
Right.
For other less severe problems, it's talking about them, and if things aren't working out, to go to a mental health professional and get treatment. Go to your family physician, talk to her, and they're increasingly well trained in hooking you up with treatment, or if necessary, getting on medication.
So as we wrap up here, is there one final thought that you would like to leave people with?
No, I think it's too complex to bring it down to it's sort of like the football announcer says, if they're not going to gain more yards, they're not going to win. Well, we already knew that. These are the things that are important. If major stressors are going on in your life, it's likely that you're going to react to it and need help. Or if you're just genetically endowed, many people don't really have negative things in their life. They just have a genetic predisposition to bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, even depression carries about a 50% genetic load. So, if you have family members who have, if your mom and your grandma had, your mom and your grandfather had a history of major depression, you probably, it might be environmental, but it's also increasingly likely that you have a genetic load that predisposes you for depression.
And I think by taking the time to acknowledge what's going on, to study it, to research, and to get some of the tools, that should better help us navigate.
Yeah, and there are a lot of self-help books, and you can start there, and you can search online for readings, and especially if it's from National Organization for Mental Health, or a government website on mental health, or any responsible website, and they often have some self-help steps that you can take, and tests that you can take for sort of I wouldn't say diagnosis, but to see whether recognize, you probably, if you're looking, you probably think
right.
You might have a difficulty, or your loved one has a difficulty, and then you validate it through perhaps a simple quiz.
Right.
The quiz for screening for depression in hospitals is only 9 questions, so 9 questions shouldn't take that much time, and can get you in the right direction. If you refuse to go, you refuse to go. If you refuse to take care of your alcoholism or your gallbladder, it's there's going to be negative consequences, and there's again, right. we can't kidnap people and have them eat right or live right.
Right. Well, I think knowing what triggers you, knowing your family history, knowing when to talk to an expert and how to deal with that will help. And they can get more information on your website or by scheduling an appointment with you. We appreciate you coming on the show today, Dr. Hobfoll.
Thank you for having me, Brandy.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to Mental Health Helps. If you're an expert or you have a story you would like to share, please reach out to us at gooddeedrevolution.org.